Okay, so for this week's topic of the week, we're looking at aiming our students to primary resources. For our students in the one-to-one environment especially, this is a very important skill for them to have because there are so many resources out there online, and a lot of our students are having a hard time determining what resources are credible versus what ones are not. So why does this matter? If you've seen either of these any of these three websites, Cold Cares, the Pacific Northwest Tree Octopus, or the Overprimer Foundation, these are all really well done examples of completely false, fake websites that are just put out there to try and get people to understand that not everything that you see online is the truth. Not everything is going to be the gospel. Obviously, there's no such thing as the Pacific Northwest Tree Octopus. So you can explore that website. They even have photos of this little creature in trees. To our students, it looks legitimate. It is not. Check these three out, and then you'll see why this really matters. So what are we talking about? Instead of just telling our students to just Google it, we're looking to guide them to solid resources and resources that we want them to be using for this class, not just whatever they happen to find when they Google. We're going to look at how you can evaluate the resources, or how the students can evaluate the resources that they find in order to determine whether the resource is actually a credible one. And actually, one of the goals that was laid out at the high school level this year was to look at guiding students towards primary resources, credible, valuable primary resources. So let's look at our options for limiting our resources. I'm going to go through a couple in their perceived order of implementation. Basically, how easy do I think that these would be for you to actually use in the classroom? The very first one is Google Scholar, and if you go to scholar.google.com, you'll get to their search engine. And basically what it is looking to do is to limit the search results to results that Google has ranked according to the weight of the full text of each document, where it was published, who wrote it, and then how often it has been recently, and how recently it's been cited in other scholarly literature. And you can look at articles, patents, or case law. So what this does is it gives the students a way to look at credible resources right off the bat. Instead of just going to Google and finding whatever they can find, you can direct them to using scholar.google.com instead, and then look at specifically, for example, just the articles. Or I worked with one teacher this week who was having her students design products. They could look at patents within Google Scholar and then determine whether what they are looking at designing has already been patented. Or if they're looking at a case or at something that has changed law in our country, they can look at just case law and actually find credible resources about case law instead. The second one is to do a custom Google search, and if you go onto my website on the right hand side, you'll actually see an example of this. And basically what a custom Google search allows you to do is limit a search engine on your website or through a very long link that they give you, which you can then shrink through a URL shrinker. It will search just the web pages that you want it to search. So for example, on my website on simmonsclassroom.com, the search engine that I have on the right hand side specifically looks at the three websites that I've put out for this position. So simmonsclassroom.com, guides.simmonsclassroom.com, as well as bytes.simmonsclassroom.com. So my search engine on my primary website will only search those three sites. It will not search out exterior sources as well. So if you're looking for a piece of information that I've put out but you don't know what website to find it on, I've given you the three that I have, and that search engine will be limited to just those three. So check it out. The custom search is fairly easy to set up. It's especially useful if you already have a web page or some sort of online environment for your kids where you can add a widget, which is a little piece of code that then creates the search engine on your website for you. The last one is you can do this through a Google Doc, or you can do it on your website, any number of different ways, but basically what we're looking at doing is just purely posting a list of links and then limiting when the students do their project or do their research project, they're only permitted to use the links that are on this website or on this document that you've given them. So it might take a little bit of work to get set up in that you have to manually enter all the information. However, it would be a great way to go to limit their resources. Then, of course, there are resources that are available to you from our librarians at both schools. ProQuest, Alexandria, EBSCOhost, and eBury are some of them, and there are a plethora of other ones available as well. I highly encourage you to work with our librarians in both schools to look more in depth as to how you can do this in your own classroom as well. Both librarians are very adept at this sort of information and resource limiting, so certainly make an appointment to check it out with them as well. In terms of evaluating our resources, the very first resource evaluator that we're going to look at is Read, Write, Think, and that's an evaluation form. It's a very easy process, specifically at the middle school level. Basically, all that the students have to do is answer some questions about the resource that they're looking at. It will deal with, like, when was it published, who was it published by, is it an EDU, is it a Gov site, what kind of website is it, when was it last updated. As you answer these questions, at the very end, it's going to provide an output of a PDF form that the kids can then reference later, which makes it really easy for use in the classroom, especially for our middle school kiddos. I could easily see this sort of tool being used with our students in the classroom. You could have your students in your class evaluate a plethora of resources and then give you the PDF reports back, so that way you can add these resources to your own list of resources for other students to use. The other one is a research evaluation form. This one is an online PDF that you can fill in and then print out. So you only do one resource at a time, but it's a fairly easy to use tool, little bit more advanced than Read, Write, Think. If you're familiar with Read, Write, Think, you know that's a fairly straightforward, easy to use resource. But it does include who owns the research, owns the resource in the first place. So using online tools to determine who registered the domain that information is found on. So if you look at, for example, some websites out there that let you look up who has our domain registered, you can look at my website address, simmonsclassroom.com, and you can actually figure out that I am the one that registered that domain. I own it. I'm the originator, and you can tell where I registered it. So for example, if I were to be looking up, doing research on a project on Texas, and I used a domain registration search tool to figure out who owns the domain, and the person that owns the domain is someone in the Middle East, and the web page is about Texas, they may not be a very credible resource to tell me about what's going on in Texas. Whereas if I were to look at a domain registration search tool and figure out that the person is actually in Texas, they might be a fairly knowledgeable source about their own state. And then the very last one, I think that this is great to use with the high school kids. It would certainly elicit a couple laughs, if nothing else, is the CRAP test. And basically what we're looking at doing is rating a website on a score of 0 to 50, or scale of 0 to 50 points. The higher the number of points and the more credible and valuable the resource is, the lower the score, then obviously the less likely they are to use it. And they tell you in this PDF form that anything below a 30 should not be used. So that's a pretty low cutoff. But this would be a really great tool in my mind to give to your kids, have them evaluate the resources, give you the CRAP score on the website, and then you can use their CRAP scores to develop a list of resources on your own web page for use in future classes. And you can include the CRAP score ranking, so that way the student can determine for themselves whether they want to be using that website or not. So maybe you include on that list some resources that are below 30, just so that way you can get them used to looking at the fact that this website is not very well ranked, it's not very highly thought of, so perhaps they shouldn't be using it. So instead of doing the work yourself and figuring out all these resources, the first time that you're looking at limiting resources, you could put it back on the kids, have them use the CRAP test, develop that score for you, and then use that when you're developing your list of resources on your website or on a Google Doc. So that pretty much covers it for the topic. It's pretty easy to do. If you'd like to learn more about how to limit resources, or if you'd like to set up your own Google search engine, or look at how to include resources within your web page, obviously make an appointment with me, and I am always here to help.